From the Sunshine State, this is Tampa Bay's 10 Talk.
It's time for FLA Law, brought to you by the personal injury attorneys of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes. This hour will be informative, along with taking your questions and comments. Now, here are your hosts for today's show.
Good evening. Today is Tuesday, and it is 5 o'clock. That means the law firm of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes is here for the next 1 hour to answer any legal questions that you may have on our show, FLA Law on the radio. This is not Jacqueline Bryan. I know if you were listening last week, Jacqueline may have said she'll be here, but Jacqueline was called away to another event where I think she's going to be getting an award for her dedication in the legal community. I don't know that for sure, but if she doesn't get it, she surely deserves it. But I am here. This is Matthew Noyes. I'm one of the partners at the law firm of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes. But I'm not here alone. I'm here with my other partner, Brian Caulfield. Brian, thank you for jumping in and helping out this week as well.
No problem, Matt. Always glad to come in and answer questions for the callers.
And so, callers, if you do have a question, I have to hit the go live on Facebook before I tell callers to jump to on Facebook. We are on Facebook. We are live on our firm's page at Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes Injury Lawyers. If you want to send us a question on Facebook, please do that. We're looking at it right here. But also, if you have a question, you can call the law line at 727-441-3000. Brian Caulfield and myself are here to answer any questions that you may have regarding the law. Brian, why don't you refresh our listeners what areas of law our firm handles and what we can tackle tonight?
Well, since 1955, our firm has practiced personal injury law. And basically, that just means all the things you're probably most familiar with, like auto accidents, motorcycle accidents, truck accidents, slip and fall, trip and fall. But we also do workers' compensation and Social Security type matters. So really, any type of injury or wrongful death kind of question that you have. If you have a question about whether you have a case, if you have a question about something you've heard that is the law and that you want to know if that's really true, feel free. The law office is open for the next 1 hour, and you can reach us live and free of charge.
Right, and that's what happens too oftentimes. People turn to Google. Google Esquire is what I call it, and they think they get the answer to their legal question via Google.
Yeah,
and too many times that's just a problem.
Well, and one of the things I noticed quite a bit after practicing here for 35 years, being in Florida, many folks are from somewhere else, whether you're from New York, New Jersey, the Midwest, but everybody has a family expert that wants to tell
That's so true.
the Florida citizen here how their personal injury case should go, what the law should be, what the law is, and unfortunately what they're telling our clients many times is wrong because they're telling them law that's applicable in another state but not applicable in this state. So, in a sense, Google is actually an improvement over the type of things that I used to hear. So
that could be true.
But certainly a lot of times, you do turn to family members for advice. But unfortunately, when you're turning to a family member that is out of state and you're asking for them to comment on, number one, a profession that they're not a member of, and number two, a state law that they know nothing about, that can create problems for you right off the bat. So it really is important when you have a legal question or you've just heard something, you have an ongoing case, you should talk it over with your attorney because you don't want to be making decisions based on improper information that was told to you by someone else.
I see that a lot in the workers' comp arena. And every state has different workers' compensation laws. But many times my client says, well, my uncle got hurt in New York and he gets X, Y, and Z under workers' comp. And so we always have to tell them that New York law is quite different than Florida workers' comp law.
Yeah, and it's the same thing with, auto accident related type law. It certainly varies from state to state. And so that's why it's so important that, you have to make sure that the advice you're getting is in-state advice, so to speak.
Sure.
It's Florida law that's, you're getting advice upon.
And we often give advice to clients, potential clients, that we may not even sign up for one reason or the other. So it's a no-cost consultation to get your answers to your questions.
Yeah.
So it makes sense to give us a call.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't make any sense to take action before you talk. I mean, certainly every personal injury attorney, all you have to do is turn on the television and you're going to see free consultation, free consultation, free consultation. And the best thing to do is take advantage of that. In fact, you can have a consultation with more than one lawyer so that you can pick out the lawyer that's right for you. But certainly you should take advantage of that free consultation anytime you or a loved one's been involved in an accident. You should get your questions answered before you take actions.
You raised a good topic, and that is all the personal injury attorneys commercials that are on TV. I sit there and I just cringe, and I'm a personal injury attorney. What would you tell our listeners? What's the best way to find the right personal injury attorney that's for your case? Just rely on the commercial?
No, I think unfortunately that's probably the thing you should least rely on. I mean, there's certain things that you want as a client. Obviously, you want to have an attorney that is skilled and experienced in the area of law, but it's not always so easy to tell because there's not a single lawyer that goes on and says, I'm inexperienced and I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'd like to practice on your case.
Let me try on your case.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are certain things that you can look at. Obviously, consumers of really any type of good or service in this day look at Google reviews. That's certainly one helpful thing to look at. Obviously, the number of years in business, the type of cases they handle. Are they a jack of all trades or are they specialized in one? Are they board certified, which is a program by the Florida Bar that basically tests the expertise and skill of lawyers in a particular area? And so board certification is a way for a consumer to assure themselves that they have someone that when they say they're skilled and experienced, they can actually back it up. So certainly people should do their homework before they go out, and make that kind of a decision. It really is incredibly important. But the good news is there's no shortage of lawyers out there that are willing to help you.
Right. And I think what also is important is they talk to people, to get referrals from people, talk to their family members, talk to their friends, talk to their church or doctors even, as to what lawyer has earned their respect.
Yeah, I mean, really, that's like cross-referencing in a sense. Whenever I plan a trip to go somewhere, I'm always looking, at what's the best sightseeing thing or what's the best hotel to stay at. And if you're looking at multiple different sources and you're seeing 1, 2, or 3, say hotels or restaurants come up, that you've really narrowed down the best of what that area has to offer.
You're not going to rely on that Hilton just because of the Hilton commercial.
Yeah, it's
or their website even.
Yeah, the problem that there really is when people have a need for an attorney, it's immediate and unexpected in our line of work. So, they haven't spent time researching who's going to be the attorney I call if and when I need it. And when that need comes up, you need and want instant gratification. So many times people just call the first, either a name that they remember because of frequent advertising, or they suddenly start paying attention to ads on TV that they previously didn't pay attention to. And so that's a way that they can end up and sometimes kind of taking a knee-jerk, reaction because they don't really have the time to do the research that would be really helpful or necessary.
Yeah. And as Brian mentioned, we are a personal injury law firm that specializes in helping people that get injured in automobile accidents, trip and falls, work injuries, and we even help people with Social Security disability. So if you have questions regarding any of those areas of law, we are here for you. 727-441-3000 is the law line. And if you have a question that doesn't have to do with those areas of law either, we're happy to play Stump the Lawyer. Brian and I are able to talk about areas of law that we may not handle on a day-to-day basis, but we've been doing it for decades, and we may be able to at least give you some guidance in those regards. That is, unless they start talking about the rules of perpetuity and such like that. That's when I get to defer it over to you,
Yeah,
Brian.
no, if they start kind of dredging up stuff that we haven't had since first year of law school, then we might both be in trouble.
That's right. But before we take any calls on the law line, Brian, I wanted to touch base with you. It's summertime. Florida's a hot spot. Tampa Bay is a hot spot for people to visit and come down. And many times those people come down and they rent cars to get to and from. It could be from Georgia. It could be from London. What can you tell our listeners, what's the risk or what's the problem that you and I see as personal injury attorneys when our clients are injured as a result of the negligence of someone driving a rental car?
Well, Matt, that goes back to the fact that both you and I have been doing this long enough to remember when the law was the law of Florida and there were no exceptions made for rent-a-car companies.
Right.
And the law was that, the owner and the driver were jointly and severally liable when an accident takes place. And the thought behind that is, our government wanted to make sure there was financial responsibility behind the motor vehicle to make sure that the owner and the driver are responsible, and to make sure that owners would only lend their car out to responsible drivers if they had financial consequences to that lending. So there was something known as the dangerous instrumentality doctrine here in the state of Florida for many, many, many years. Except there was one group of people that didn't like that.
Right.
And that was the for-profit, multi-billion-dollar rent-a-car companies. And being as strong as they are, they lobbied the federal government, and the federal government came up with a law that basically superseded our Florida law and said that a rent-a-car company, they don't have an obligation like they used to have for many years, where if their rent-a-car caused an accident, the renter driver was responsible, but so was the company. Instead, they through the use of their lobbying efforts, turned the law on its head and basically said no longer is the rent-a-car company liable. And so the net effect of that is when you see someone driving around in a rent-a-car and they've come from another state and they hit you, you better hope they have good coverage back in their home state. Sure, you can file a lawsuit against them here in the state of Florida, but in terms of their assets could be in another state, their assets could be in another country. Right. And they just go back to that country. They could be from the other side of the world and just never come back.
Right.
And you can sue them, you can get a judgment against them, but then how are you going to go enforce that judgment? So really, it was probably, in my lifetime, that's probably the worst change in the law that I've seen, that consumers have no idea what's happened to them. Here in Florida, if someone comes and causes injury to a Florida citizen, you would like to know that rent-a-car company was financially responsible, because if there was a catastrophic event where one of their renters, seriously injured or killed somebody, they can spread that cost over many hundreds of thousands of rentals. It might add, pennies,
right,
to the cost of the rental. But now that's not going to be the law. So you could find yourself as a citizen of Florida that someone in a rent-a-car runs into you. They have like little or no coverage, and you could be someone with catastrophic quadriplegic type injuries, and the big rent-a-car company that has the ability to have insurance to respond doesn't have to anymore. So
right.
That's probably been the worst change in personal injury law that I have seen during my 35 years of doing this. There was no good reason to do it either.
And it doesn't make sense. If I own a vehicle and I let cousin Joe drive my vehicle, I don't charge him for it. I just let him drive the vehicle, and he causes injuries. Both cousin Joe and myself are responsible, even though I haven't received any compensation whatsoever for letting cousin Joe drive it. However, if the rent-a-car who receives money for cousin Joe to be driving it and can dictate how much money they can charge, if cousin Joe causes a crash in their vehicle, only cousin Joe, if he has insurance, is responsible. And the person who collected money for allowing that person to drive is not responsible for the actions. Just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting that the rent-a-car company finds themselves in a better position liability-wise than all of the private citizens of the state of Florida.
Yes.
And there was no reason for it in the first place. And unfortunately, it just goes to show you money and power can change the law.
Yeah.
And that's a sad fact. But, you and I have really, you hear about those things and you say, well, how's that going to affect me? And that's something that I know you and I have seen in our lifetimes. And we've had to have plenty of conversations with people that were injured by rent-a-car company vehicles, and the renter might have only had $10,000 in coverage. Hey, I'm sorry that you have $200,000 in medical bills, but that driver only had $10,000 worth of coverage, and we can no longer sue the rent-a-car companies here in the state of Florida. So that just really a really bad change in the law. But there have been, a number of changes in the law, over the last couple of decades, and kind of each major change that we've had in the law is shrinking the rights of Florida citizens. And we just had another one this past, March.
Right. And we talked about all the tourist driving in the rental cars, but they also use Uber and Lyft and other types of other type of commercial drive sharing companies. What's the law in Florida for if an Uber driver causes a crash?
Well, it sounds like you actually have some good law that's been made in that situation. You've got a situation where if they're actually in the middle of taking a fare, they run into you, then Uber has to have up to $1 million in insurance coverage to pay for injuries that you've suffered. It's a little bit different if the Uber driver's like not on the clock, doesn't have a paying passenger, and they're just cruising around waiting for a call. The amount's much lower.
But it's still $50,000.
It's still $50,000, which is more than a private citizen is required to have in the state of Florida. Probably the biggest insurance myth I've ever encountered in my career is people believe that Florida, they come in after they've been injured by someone, and they come in and say, well, the person has to have insurance. I know Florida is a state that there's mandatory insurance. So can you speak to that? Are they right? Should they feel good about the fact that it's guaranteed that the person that rear-ended them and injured them has coverage?
That's the craziest part about Florida, is people think, oh, well, they told me I had full coverage. Well, unfortunately, in the state of Florida, you're not required to carry bodily injury liability coverage in most situations. As a result, about 60% of the people have less than $10,000 worth of bodily injury liability coverage, and about 1/3 don't have any bodily injury liability coverage. They're not breaking the law. The law doesn't require them to carry it.
Yeah, and people are shocked, and they say, what do you mean? And we explain, well, the law only requires them to have $10,000 in property damage to pay up to 10 grand for your vehicle, and the law requires them to have 10,000 in PIP benefits to pay for injuries that they might incur in the accident.
Not your injuries, their injuries.
Yeah, their own injuries, nothing for you. So, that's probably the biggest surprise when I talk to new clients. They just can't believe that's possible. But it is possible. It is the law of Florida. And Matt, you make an interesting point. If we kind of put that into a graphic, we're at rush hour. So if you're stopped at a red light, look in the rear view mirror, and you might have 10 cars behind you. And 6 out of those 10 are going to have probably $10,000 in bodily injury liability coverage or none whatsoever.
Right.
And so how can you protect yourself from being run into and injured by a vehicle? How can you protect yourself and your family members about getting hit by the uninsured or underinsured motorist?
And that's why it's so important. And we preach it every Tuesday here on FLA Law on the radio. We preach the importance of making sure that you purchase uninsured or underinsured motorist coverage on your car insurance policy. Uninsured motorist or UM coverage stands in the shoes of the at-fault driver. If you purchase uninsured motorist coverage and the at-fault driver does not have any bodily injury liability coverage, which again is not required in the state of Florida, or does not have enough to adequately compensate you for your damages, then you can make an uninsured motorist claim under your own policy. And then your uninsured motorist carrier would then go after the at-fault driver for any monies that they had to pay out on that claim.
Yeah, and going back to my example, if you're sitting at the stoplight looking at the 10 cars in your rearview mirror behind you, if you bought $1 million in uninsured motorist coverage, now every single one of those cars essentially has $1 million in coverage
Sure.
if they run into and injure you or kill someone in your vehicle. So all we can really say, and we can't say it enough, is if you don't have uninsured motorist coverage on your policy, you've committed the biggest auto insurance mistake you can possibly make, and you won't know it until tragedy strikes for you or a loved one.
Right. And insurance companies aren't screaming and shouting saying, hey, buy uninsured motorist coverage, because insurance agents and insurance companies can charge your premium based on your driving record. If you're a bad driver, they're going to charge you more for bodily injury liability coverage. If you're a good driver, they can't really justify charging you more for uninsured motorist coverage. It's the only coverage that protects you and your family from all the bad drivers out there.
Yeah, and it really is. It's less than when you buy liability coverage to protect other people you might run into and hurt. How can you do that and then reject your own uninsured motorist coverage? People can reject that coverage, which is another bad change in the law that we've seen. And the law used to be you couldn't reject the coverage. When you bought liability coverage to protect other people that you might injure, you've automatically got uninsured motorist coverage.
Right.
And unfortunately, that got whittled away by the insurance companies. And I'll never forget when they finally had their way and they turned uninsured motorist coverage into an optional coverage. I actually got a letter from my insurance company hailing it as great news. Here's a new way to save money on your car insurance. Reject the uninsured motorist coverage. Worst advice ever.
For you and your family.
We could sit here for 100 of these shows and tell some of the saddest stories that we endure in our practice having to listen to, and you feel helpless. But unfortunately, people that reject uninsured motorist coverage, you really put yourself at the mercy of who runs into you. And chances are it will be someone that if they were irresponsible enough to drive recklessly and injure you, you can pretty much guarantee that the rest of their life is irresponsible and reckless as well. They won't have insured themselves. And
they won't have the assets to protect any judgment that you have. But the problem that I have seen, mostly, I guess, it's really blossomed after COVID, is the law does require the insured to reject uninsured motorist coverage. But too often, the insurance companies are being completed online. They're just being completed by click here to sign here type of document. And what happens is it just automatically jumps down to the rejection page.
Yep, click, click, click. And little do you know, you're clicking your rights away.
Yeah.
And as you know, Matt, it's needed for the most severe accidents out there. And that's unfortunately when we find that, people don't have it. And of course, you and I have both sat in hundreds of office conferences of new clients where they say, oh, I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have rejected the coverage. I have full coverage.
Right.
Because my car is new and the bank requires me to have full coverage. Or it's a leased vehicle, so I know I have full coverage. Both of those have nothing to do with uninsured motorist coverage. So it is probably the least understood and the most important coverage. So if you take nothing else away from our show, please do this. Check your auto policy. You must have uninsured motorist coverage. If you've rejected it, you've made the biggest mistake. Get on the phone tonight to your insurance company and tell them you want to fix the mistake and you want to add uninsured motorist coverage. You'll be glad you did. And that's a coverage that covers you not only when you're in your own car, but if you go into somebody else's car as a passenger or a driver.
Right.
And, if you're riding your scooter on the sidewalk, if you're riding your bicycle, along the road. That coverage is sticking to you wherever you go. And your children, if your children are away at college,
Right.
it sticks to them, whether they're hit as a pedestrian, whether they're involved in a car accident. It truly is an unbelievably important, coverage. And if I had the opportunity to write the laws, I would make it mandatory again.
And another time that it kicks in is when you have hit and runs. We're seeing a lot of hit and run accidents lately. And if you don't obtain the insurance information from the guy that hit you and ran, your uninsured motorist coverage can come in and take place.
Yeah, they call that phantom vehicle,
Right.
so to speak. And so, that's obviously important because, as you said, it's amazing, the amount of times there's an incredibly serious injury.
Right.
And people run from the scene of the accident. And it's the typical, I didn't know I hit anything. I thought I hit a deer, or, I wasn't sure if I hit it. It's always the same. But unfortunately, that's also a very important coverage to have.
And too many times they flee because they may have been drinking. So when we come back from our break, I want to talk about a woman who was charged with DUI after she hit a police car on the Courtney Campbell Causeway. We can talk about what impact what DUI has on a claim that we have for our clients. But before we take our break, I do want to remind you that the law line is open. And if you have a question regarding automobile accidents, car insurance coverage, work injuries, Social Security disability, or any type of area of law, Mr. Caulfield and I are here to answer questions that you may have. The number is 727-441-3000. And we'll be right back right after this break.
This is the Tan Talk Radio Network.
In 1955, the law firm now known as Perenich, Caulfield, Avril, and Noyes made a decision. Instead of taking whatever cases came through their doors, they decided to focus specifically on personal injury. 64 years later, the law firm is one of Clearwater's longest-running personal injury firms. Available 24 hours a day with offices in Clearwater and throughout Tampa Bay, they're ready to put decades of experience to work for you if you or a loved one has been injured in a car accident or injured due to someone's negligence or recklessness. If you feel overwhelmed, uncertain, or unsure about your next steps after being involved in an accident or after a loved one sustained serious injuries due to someone else's negligence, call Perenich, Caulfield, Avril, and Noyes at 727-796-8282 or online at usalaw.com. That's 727-796-8282 or online at usalaw.com. Non-attorney spokesman.
This is the Tan Talk Radio Network.
We are back. This is attorney Matthew Noyes, and I'm here with my partner, Brian Caulfield. We are two of the law partners at the law firm of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril, and Noyes, the longest established personal injury law firm in Tampa Bay. We have been helping people involved in car accidents and other personal injury matters since 1955. We're approaching 70 years of being involved in the community of Tampa Bay and helping them out. And so last year we decided to help out the community a little bit more by starting our radio show, FLA Law on the Radio, and being available to answer questions that you have regarding the law. There are still some openings on the law line, so if you have questions, give us a call at 727-441-3000. You can call us regarding car insurance, automobile accidents, slip and falls, work injuries, your rights after getting hurt at work, or Social Security disability, of whether or not you could qualify for Social Security disability if you have a condition that prevents you from working. But we're here live from 5 until 6 o'clock every Tuesday. And so this is the time to have your question answered. Again, the law line is 727-441-3000. We are also live on our YouTube page and on our Facebook page at Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes Injury Lawyers. If you don't want to hear your voice on the radio, just type your question right in the comments, and we'll be happy to answer the questions that you have from our Facebook page. But Brian, before we took our break, we were talking about, hit and runs and the consequences of hit and runs and how important uninsured motorist coverage is when we're talking about a hit and run. But recently there was a woman that was charged with DUI after hitting a police car on Courtney Campbell Causeway. She was a Palm Harbor woman, 43 years old. The accident happened Monday, June 10th at about 12:27 a.m. on the westbound lanes of Courtney Campbell Causeway. She struck the left rear portion of the police cruiser, who was stopped with its emergency lights activated at the time. So a few lessons we learned. As I always told my son, nothing good happens after midnight. Be in bed before midnight. But also, she was treated for a DUI and DUI with property damage. We see too many car accidents caused by DUI drivers. What can you tell our listeners about how we handle cases when there's a DUI involved as well?
Well, they are a little bit different than a typical car accident because they open up an avenue of damages that's not typically available in a car accident case. And that avenue of damages is what is known as punitive damages. That is, you can actually get damages that are divided. They're really kind of devised to punish the person for their grossly reckless actions. So that's the type of case that can qualify for punitive damages, and there are a few other cases in the state of Florida that can.
But
so,
very few.
Very few. Really, that's about it. I mean, so other than type intentional types of torts, but it really is something that requires you to gather the information, and then ultimately you're going to be required to go down and show the court. There's a certain threshold limit that the court's going to listen to see whether or not you can make out a case for punitive damages. And if the court feels there's sufficient record evidence, then the court will let you plead for that, and then you'll have the opportunity to go in and ask a jury for that. So, that is a very interesting case, and I actually represent the officer that was involved in that case.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that when I pulled the article. And if you do get a punitive damage award, does the insurance company have to pay for that punitive damage award?
No, the insurance company is not responsible to pay for punitive damages. And the thought behind that is, if you could buy insurance that would pay punitive damages, that would cause very wealthy people just to go out and buy insurance, and then they kind of take any reckless or intentional act that they wanted to. So you are not. That's not going to be covered. If you caused the accident, and you're thinking your insurance policy is going to cover that, you're wrong.
Right. And this accident also reminds me to alert all our listeners and drivers of the vehicle that Florida does have a move over law. And the move over law says if there is a police officer on the side of the road with activated lights, it's the law that you have to move over out of that outside lane or whatever lane they're in, away from the officer for their safety. And if you don't, you get a ticket.
Yeah, I mean, obviously a really good law, because, if you've ever been on the side of the road, as unfortunately officers, typically are after they've made a traffic stop or they're attending, to people after an accident, they are so close to cars, and it's amazing, even like the wind that takes place. I mean, you just feel you're completely vulnerable out there. So it's actually a law that's come into being here recently, and actually it's been a long time coming. And we've all watched videos on YouTube or TikTok that show. There's one recently where the police officer said, "All right, stand over here because I don't want you to get hit by a car." And, I don't want to get hit by a car. And no
Right.
sooner than the officer said that, a car comes plowing into the back
Wow.
of the stopped vehicle. So it really is something that's very important, for officers and for people that find themselves in just kind of unfortunate situations where their car breaks down and the police are there trying to help them. So
Right.
you got to move over.
And that law includes not just police officers. It does include tow truck drivers, or it includes garbage trucks. It includes anybody that may be, it used to be a governmental entity that is on the side of the road. And just recently, the law changed to now include even a disabled vehicle. So it doesn't have to be law enforcement with lights activated. If there is a vehicle on the side of the road, you are required to move over for your safety and for the safety of the person that is disabled.
You might call it common sense codified by the law.
Yeah, and that's odd because most times law doesn't include common sense.
There's plenty of laws we could discuss that are anti-common sense,
Right.
but people just don't know it.
Well, saying on this, if the woman is charged with DUI, can you tell our listeners, can you go after the person who served her the alcohol? If she was coming from Joe's bar, can you go after Joe's bar for serving her?
Under very limited circumstances. Here in Florida, we have what's called a dram shop law. It's Florida Statute 768.125, and it basically says that you're not going to be able to sue the bar or restaurant or lounge that served that person unless one of two things are true. One is they willfully and unlawfully served a minor, meaning that they knew the person was a minor and served him anyway. It doesn't mean that, they got through on a fake ID and you served him, you're liable. No, that's not what it means. The bar's not liable if that's the circumstance. You have to show willful and unlawful service to a minor, or you have to show that the bar knowingly served a person habitually addicted to the use of alcohol. In other words, they knew this person was an alcoholic and they served him anyway. Pretty high standards.
Very high standard.
But, we've handled, of course, cases where we've been able to meet that high standard.
Right. Oh, great. Kevin, thank you for listening to FLA Law on the radio. How can we help you tonight?
Hey, thanks. My name's Kevin. I'm in Largo. Guys, I don't have a lot of time. I'm late for the Rays game, but I did have a question that happened. My wife got in a car accident, and unfortunately, the person that hit them did not have any insurance at all. And, I've always had, I don't want to mention their name, but I had a, well-known insurance company. I've always carried, uninsured motorists, and they're telling me that I don't have it or for my family. And I'm just wondering what I can do because I don't remember signing anything. I'm almost positive. I've always carried, I've tried to carry good insurance because of all the accidents in this area. I'm not sure what to do.
That's a good question. And unfortunately, we see that a lot. We see people thinking that they have uninsured motorist coverage. And there are some situations, and the insurance company does have a responsibility to prove that there was a rejection of coverage. Brian, how do we have the insurance company prove that there was a rejection of coverage, and what if they can't meet that requirement?
Yeah, Kevin, what they're going to need to do is they're going to need to show there was a knowing rejection of the coverage. So the way they do that is by going into their vault of paperwork and see that which they had you sign when you took the policy out. If they did indeed have you sign, and you did sign a document, and it's the appropriate document done in the appropriate print size, then the insurance company will be right. You will be out of luck. But if they can't produce that document, or if that was done incorrectly, they didn't have the correct warning, the correct type size, then their effort to get out of coverage will not be successful. But you've got to have a lawyer answer that question by getting the documents involved, because that's what the issue you're dealing with. Did you do a knowing rejection of coverage by signing a rejection? And I can tell you, Matt and I have, handled hundreds of these cases where unfortunately people are convinced they didn't do it. But as Matt kind of talked about, they find to their horror later that indeed they've clicked their signature on something
Yeah.
And so it really is a super, obviously in your case, it makes the difference between something and getting nothing. If it turns out that
Right.
person who was uninsured is your only chance to get compensation, they're uninsured, they likely have no assets. And so you're really out of luck. And so all of a sudden you incurred all these medical bills. And if they're more than your own auto insurance has, you got to have your fingers crossed and hope you have health insurance to help out. But you could be in a situation where the person goes basically scot-free for causing you or a family member, injuries that cause you pain and suffering. They cause scarring. They cause lifelong permanent injuries. And they simply kind of walk away with really nothing more than probably, a citation, for their driving.
Brian, what happens if the insurance company cannot prove that there was a rejection? What coverage do they have?
Then you get the uninsured motorist coverage. So in the amount of the liability coverage that you bought to protect other people that you might injure. So it is an important question. I've handled all kinds of these cases. I've handled ones where insurance companies attempted to forge documents.
No, we've seen that.
So that happens, but you don't take this.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, it is unbelievable, but it happens. And as Matt said, when they say that to you, you say back to them, prove it.
Right.
And get legal.
Well, I'm definitely going to call you guys because, so do you have your number listed on here?
What our number when we're not here in the radio station is 727-796-8282. Our website is voiceoftheinjured.com, and we're here to help you and anybody else that has questions regarding their insurance coverage. It's too important not to have the answers to.
Yeah, and Kevin, thanks for your call because you've given us a graphic, real-life example of why you hear us constantly talking about the importance of uninsured motorist coverage, because great chance when you get involved in an accident with someone, they're going to be uninsured or underinsured. And I can tell you, the more serious the injury in my, practice, the greater chance there is that the other side is uninsured or underinsured. So,
no, it's great. And I appreciate you guys taking the time, especially since I've heard there's been some kind of legislative changes that have made it more difficult. So, I definitely think using, if you need them, a good quality law firm like yourself is a great idea because, the regular layperson, we just don't have the knowledge base to properly handle this stuff. So I'm definitely going to call you guys, and I think other people should as well. You guys sound like you really know what you're talking about. So thanks for your time, and go Rays.
Go Rays. You get over there, As a personal injury attorney, I'm used to rooting for the underdog, and so I've been a Rays fan and a season ticket holder since day one. And so I'll be there too.
It's been a little easy this year to root for the underdog if you're a Rays fan. That's for sure.
That's for sure. Well, hopefully they can pull one out like they did last night. So enjoy the game.
Okay, guys.
Drive
Thanks a lot.
safely.
Have a great night. Thanks for the show.
Thanks,
Thank you. And that does raise another question for me that I wanted to touch base with is, what if you don't carry bodily injury liability coverage? Can you really say, hey, I should have had UM?
Well, you can say it all you want,
but you're not going to get
it.
Right. So
and that's the problem. It would be nice if that insurance product is offered, but I've never heard of it being offered. The only way to get uninsured motorist coverage is if you buy bodily injury coverage to protect other people that you might hurt. And the bodily injury coverage, again, only pays when you're negligent and you cause injury to someone else. I have plenty of people come into my office go, I bought $100,000 in bodily injury coverage. Look at my policy right here. And I'm like, yep, you sure did. Except that's not going to help you after a car accident for your injuries. What I'm looking for on your policy and I'm not finding is uninsured motorist coverage because the accident was caused by an uninsured motorist. And unfortunately, you don't have uninsured motorist coverage. And unfortunately, that is a conversation I've had to have far too many times in my career.
And uninsured motorist coverage is oftentimes less expensive than bodily injury liability coverage.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a terrible place to try to save money.
Right.
Let's put it that way.
Right. If you're going to have to save money, reduce your bodily injury liability limits to pay for the premiums of the uninsured
Yeah.
motorists if you have to do that.
You simply, if you didn't buy uninsured motorist coverage, you haven't bought proper auto insurance.
Right.
We want to make it that simple.
I had a family member who had $250,000 worth of bodily injury liability coverage, but no UM.
Right. And then they'll
It's like,
tell,
what are you doing?
well, and then they'll say, well, my insurance agent said if you have health insurance, you don't need
Exactly.
uninsured motorist
I think you
coverage.
did say that too.
That's a typical thing that I heard. And that's just absolutely awful advice.
Right.
I mean, just it's terrible advice. So
Right.
if I've told people after the accident, if your agent told you this, the first thing you need to do is fire your agent,
Exactly.
because
true.
they weren't looking out for you like they're supposed to. Instead, they were looking out for their company. They didn't want to sell uninsured motorist coverage, because when they do, they protect you against every other driver on the road whose record they can't check. They want to sell you bodily injury coverage only after they see that you've got a spotless driving record and you're not likely to cause them any money.
Right.
And you'll be a person that's paying in, and never causing them to have to pay
Right.
out. It's a whole different thing, because even our own law firm, at one point, we went to get additional insurance, and the insurance agent sent over the paperwork with the UM rejection already highlighted as to where we should sign.
No,
That was the
that's
end of them.
That's right. That's Brian Caulfield. He is a board-certified civil trial attorney and a partner at the law firm of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes. And I am Matt Noyes at the same law firm, and we are proud to be the host of FLA Law on the radio every Tuesday here on WTAN Talk Radio. I'm sorry, TAN Talk. And we do have a few more minutes of this week's show. And the number on the law line is 727-441-3000. So call us before this happens. Brian and I used to do FLA Law on TV. And how many times did it happen that all the calls came in the last few minutes of the show, and it was just impossible to take them off? And so we encourage you, if you do have a legal question, call us now, 727-441-3000. I will be back next week on Tuesday from 5 until 6. And I think I have Lori Robinson, yet another board-certified civil trial attorney in our office. And we will be here to answer your questions as well. Brian, how often is it that we have 2 board-certified civil trial attorneys out of 5 lawyers? How often is it that you see law firms that have, 40% of their attorneys being board certified?
Probably unheard of.
Yeah.
Just about.
What percentage of attorneys are board certified?
It depends on the particular area of board certification, but I'm a board certified civil trial lawyer, and last time I checked, it was less than 2% of all Florida lawyers are board certified.
Yeah.
In civil trial law.
Yeah. So it's important that's one of the things you look for too, as part of your specialty, as part of your knowledge and dedication to the area of law that you do. Too many times we see a lot of lawyers that do family law, criminal defense, and personal injury. And, we just feel that we want to remain dedicated to helping people in our areas of law. Personal injury changes on a daily basis. We get case law on different types of how personal injury law is decided on a daily basis. So it's important that we stay on top of it. That's why we think it's important that you rely on a firm that is dedicated to personal injury law. We are also talking about some of the laws that we just thought were unjust and unfair. And Brian, I'd be wrong if I didn't talk about that one law that we have to suffer through on the medical malpractice wrongful death cases that we deal with. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about the injustice that happens when a loved one dies because of medical malpractice in certain situations?
Yeah, and there's a law out there that I guarantee you don't know anything about. And that law is a cap on damages in medical negligence cases. It is a protection for the negligent doctor that injured or killed you or a loved one. And I've had it rear its ugly head very recently. And that law basically says if the at-fault doctor or hospital offers to admit liability in the case and go to arbitration rather than have you go to a jury trial, and you agree, then your non-economic damages are capped at $250,000. And if you don't agree, you don't have to go to arbitration, but when you go to a jury trial, your non-economic damages will still be capped at $350,000. And the defendant, the fact that they offered to admit liability, can never be mentioned in a court of law. So if you think about this law, it's actually a law not to protect the victim of medical negligence, but to affect the doctor that committed the negligence. And in certain cases, especially wrongful death cases, where you lose your spouse, and I had a case recently where the folks had just retired, and then it was clear medical negligence, and unfortunately the wife died as a result. And, you have to look at your client and say, well, unfortunately, under this law, the maximum I'm going to be able to get, even if I go to a trial and win, for your non-economic damages is $350,000. It's
so if somebody undergoes surgery and the surgeon commits malpractice and results in that patient being confined to a wheelchair for the rest of his life, and they admit that they were negligent, their pain and suffering damages, the intangible damages, they're capped. Is that what you're telling us?
Yeah, it's the non-economic damages can be capped, and they're kind of different levels depending on the injuries, and there's some small exceptions. But for the most part, if it's a regular negligence and a wrongful death case, you're out of luck. And those damages get capped. And I can tell you, when you're dealing with a medical negligence defendant insurance carrier, they look at your case and say, well, the worst that can happen to us is $350,000
right.
for non-economic damages. We're darn sure not going to pay you that much to settle the case. So,
right.
People basically have had their right to jury trial stricken. And if you think about it, a jury could sit down on a case like that and award $2 million, $3 million, $5 million, $10 million.
Sure.
And their effort is for naught, because it then immediately gets reduced back to this arbitrary limit. It's completely hypocritical to everything that you hear, coming out of the same political people that are, saying that people should have personal responsibility, saying that there should be an absolute right, to own guns, but they think nothing of trampling on your right to a jury trial.
What about, we talk about that unfair law that has to do with capping damages. What about that law that says that if somebody dies because of medical malpractice and they don't have a surviving spouse or children under 25 years old, that they don't have a case? Can you tell our listeners a little bit about that? Well, that's the injustice. That's horrible injustice.
Well, I mean, we in the industry call it a free kill law. That is essentially, we have many, many calls from adult children whose parents have unfortunately died as a result of medical negligence. And the first question we ask, well, is there a surviving spouse? The answer is no. Next question, are there any minor children under age 25? No. Well, unfortunately, the answer is you really don't have a case that you can bring, because, that wouldn't be the case if it were a regular car accident kind of case. You would be able to make some recovery, but medical negligence has carved out their own special laws.
Right, and I know legislatures, again, talking about trying to take that out. But we only have about a minute left on this edition of FLA Law on the radio. Brian, why don't you tell our listeners again how they can reach us if we're not here in the radio station?
If you want to call us, our number is 727-796-8282. And of course, you can visit us at voiceoftheinjured.com, and we'll be happy to answer any legal questions or have a free consultation with you about any kind of personal injury question or need that you might have.
Sure, and we're happy to review your insurance policy as well to make sure you have that uninsured motorist. This is Matthew Noyes. I will be back next week, same time, same channel. But in the meantime, drive safely and watch out for those who don't. Good night.
WTAN Clearwater
FM 106.1.